Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse, where we talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today, we're going to be talking about 2 Chainz and his new album, Based on a True Story, Part 2, Me Time. Now, for the most part, this whole reviewing thing is pretty awesome. Now, it's not nearly at the point where it's going to pay my bills or anything, but I do really enjoy it. I like having the opportunity to discuss material that's on the front edge of pop culture, the stuff that's currently engaging people and sparking discussion. And the fact that I might be able to contribute something to that sort of discussion, if only just a fleeting observation, well, that could be a real treat. But there is a downside to this job. Reviewing albums that you know you're probably going to despise going in, and then just preparing yourself for the maelstrom of hatred to hit you like a goddamn tsunami. This doesn't even have the thrill of the clinical dissection or shooting fish in a barrel that tackling the real catastrophic albums tends to bring. No, this is the workman's duty of just covering mediocrity because for some reason it has captured the attention of pop culture, and even though you have that sinking feeling in your gut that it's gonna fail even to meet your low expectations, well, you gotta talk about it anyways. But let's be optimistic. Even though going into 2 Chainz' follow-up album, Based on a True Story 2, Me Time, I had the strong suspicion that I'd end up hating it, I am curious about the 2 Chainz phenomenon, if that makes any sense, in the same way that I'm perplexed by how a singer like Future became famous. Keep in mind that 2 Chainz has been in the rap game since 1997, and was once on Disturbing the Peace, Ludacris's record label, and yet it has taken him over a decade to become commercially successful, or get a major label debut. And then Kanye West, making one of many inexplicable Kanye West decisions, decided to recruit 2 Chainz for the lead-off single Mercy off of 2012's Cruel Summer, the collaboration album from Good Music that did very little to impress me, particularly coming off the much stronger Watch the Throne from Kanye. And suddenly, 2 Chainz was everywhere on hip-hop radio, to the bewilderment of critics, myself included. There were so many better rappers working, and yet we gave chart success to the rapper who formerly had the name Titty Boy, and whose rapping was roughly on that intellectual level. And I gotta be honest, I really hated his debut album Based on a True Story, as it was yet another trap instrumentation-driven wasteland of worthless punchlines and terrible rapping. 2 Chainz did absolutely nothing to inspire any sort of emotional reaction from me, other than groans of disgust. But the chart success of the album was kind of mesmerizing in the ways it didn't make the slightest iota of sense to me. We had a rapper who had nothing to say and very little in the way of how he might say it, and yet he was hugely successful. So, this review is going to be a little bit different. Based on a True Story Part 2 Me Time is going to, in my opinion very wrongly, outsell every other record that comes out this week. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my time to explore why this guy is so popular in the process of reviewing his album. What his appeal is to the mainstream. I want to understand the phenomenon of 2 Chainz. I want to understand why this guy is popular. Hell, if I miss something about this guy or if I misjudged him, I want to be surprised or proven wrong. I mean, if the problem is me, I want to realize that. So, what do I think? Well, let's start with considering 2 Chainz the performer, and immediately I can understand this guy's appeal in pop music. He's got a lot of energy and he spits his lyrics with a fair amount of passion. He's at least articulate and displays something of a personality, which is more than I can say about some of the rappers working in the trap scene or who are currently signed. He's never boring, and that's a good thing. And I mean, if we're looking for a rapper who is able to sell reveling and wallowing in shallow decadence, dear God, 2 Chainz is the guy to which we should be going. Okay, that's unfair. If 2 Chainz wants to brag about his success after so long, I guess I shouldn't deny him that. And I will say that he is something of a versatile personality, at least in terms of switching up his flow. He can handle multiple cadences and paces on his songs, and while he still is a punchline rapper, working better in little pieces than as a coherent whole, he does come up with enough punchlines to suggest a certain amount of creativity and attain a bit of a decent flow. In fact, I'll be completely honest here. If he had somebody else writing his rhymes, I'd probably be able to tolerate 2 Chainz a lot more than I currently do. And to continue on this tangent of surprising positives regarding 2 Chainz, I think that his production and instrumentation has definitely improved on this album over his last one. It sounds a little bit more opulent, a little bit more energetic, with an influx of horns and the occasional bit of guitars and strings and piano, do a fair bit to elevate the standard trap instrumentation. Yeah, sure, there's little to no texture, all that much creativity in the production, but this is rap clearly meant for the radio, and as such it's not exactly going to be pushing boundaries or looking to challenge you. And that's not always a bad thing if the hooks are there, and to my surprise, there were a few fairly decent hooks on this album. And that's another thing about 2 Chainz that explains his popularity quite well, to me at least. He's not a challenging rapper in flow, lyrics, instrumentation, or subject matter. Everything 2 Chainz has talked about has been done in hip-hop for well over a while, and people respond well to what's familiar, albeit with a different face. Sure, it's the same Cash Money Hose anthems we've heard time and time before, but it's got a modern twist in the production, and you can worm your way into 2 Chainz' headspace. I can definitely see why people could like the subject matter, because he does kind of make his constant bragging sound kind of awesome with a lot of his energy and occasional witty line. And I will say this, he's definitely good about calling up his guest stars and have them deliver quite well on this album. Drake, Cal One, Rich Homie Quan, and even Mace of all people deliver great verses on this album, verses that do wonders for elevating the songs. And when the guests do their absolute damnedest to match the tone of the song and try to keep things on topic, it can produce some pretty solid vibes. So for nothing else, 2 Chainz has some really talented friends. Now with all that in mind, however, I do have a few, well, let's not call them complaints, but concerns about how 2 Chainz might be able to better improve his longevity beyond his brief time in the spotlight. So let's start with the lyrics, where I think there is the most space for improvement. I think that we can start with adopting a consistent rhyme scheme. Forget the hard rhyming nonsense, but actually showing some lyrical consistency where the verses connect with each other, and the chorus to enhance the atmosphere of the song. Once he's mastered this very important and yet very basic step that used to be quintessential for aspiring rappers, then we can move on to content and lyrical poetry. But before we get there, we need to talk about lyrical flow. As a punchline rapper, 2 Chainz works best in little snippets of wit, which can have some immediate satisfaction, but doesn't really amount to the same heft you get from a well-composed verse that builds to a chorus. Let's draw a comparison with A$AP Ferg, who raps all about a lot of the same stuff as 2 Chainz does, but throws in references to African-American pop culture and the occasional shade of nuance that makes his tracks seem a little bit more bigger, a little bit more intelligent than they might really be. Whereas 2 Chainz might have occasional creative punchlines, but that seldom makes up for a whole verse. And another problem comes in his choruses. Most often they're just the single line repeated ad nauseum, or 1 or 2 lines just repeated until our brains start hemorrhaging. I like to prefer that a little bit more of a well-constructed chorus could do a lot for 2 Chainz. And now let's move on to the subject matter, which is an interesting yet familiar juxtaposition between the thug and the rapper who's made it. As such, we get a collection of barely memorable bragging tracks that have the value of an empty box made of air, but I want to focus on the song So We Can Live featuring T-Pain. Now, 2 Chainz, you start off the track talking about being stopped by the cops, and I start thinking, oh, he's gonna do a song about racial profiling like Jay-Z's classic 99 Problems. Okay, that's a real issue that affects millions of people, and I'm curious to see how you address this in your music. So in this track, 2 Chainz shows some fear that he might go to jail, and he admits that he did smoke some weed in his car, but he threw out the joint, and the officer grudgingly lets him go after 2 Chainz tells him that he's going to his uncle's house. And then 2 Chainz goes to a junkie's house, presumably to sell him more drugs, and then proceed to brag about his life again. So, to summarize 2 Chainz, not only did you co-opt the premise of 99 Problems, you completely missed the goddamn point of 99 Problems, and made it even worse because you lied to the cops and then have perpetuated the negative stereotypes that have inevitably affected your life for the worse. You do realize this, right? And look, it's really the bragging where I find my biggest question surrounding 2 Chainz. Well, it's because it's loaded into nearly every single song and can completely derail the tone. At best, it's kinda harmless in songs like Feds Watching or in Black Unicorn, but at worst, it muddles the actual message of the song and makes 2 Chainz seem kind of vapid. Take You Da Realist, which starts off being a song trying to commemorate a fallen friend, and then turns into just another brag rap about getting laid and stacking cash. Beautiful Pain completely squanders a good verse from Mace and a decent hook from Lloyd, with 2 Chainz just going on about how he's getting laid again and how he's always winning. We get the point, 2 Chainz. And this is always an issue I run into when you have rappers bragging about how loaded they are right now, and yet continue rapping about selling drugs. Here's a very simple question. Why the hell are you continuing to sell drugs and live an obviously dangerous lifestyle when you don't need the money anymore? I get the message that you're only doing what you do so you can live, and you're trying to have a song that can relate to your fans' experiences. But here's my point, 2 Chainz. If you're trying to relate to the emotions of your audience, then why do you fill every single one of your songs with disses directed at a nebulous you? And since you never name names on who you might be feuding with, the natural presumption is that the you is aimed at the audience, or your haters, or your girls. It's never really clear. So with that in mind, why on earth would I like a song where it sounds like I'm being dissed for not liking your material, or being dissed for having less money than you and having less fame and success than you? On songs like Where You Been, where you're singing, I bought a new crib just to fuck you in. Are you talking to me? Or are you talking to your haters or to your girls? I'm confused, 2 Chainz. I don't swing that way, and either way it comes across as a little insulting. And sure, I get it. You've been in the game a long time, and you probably don't want to have to deal with haters right now. But with lines like, I hope you get testicular cancer in the brain with no clarification of who you're talking about, which thus means I'm assuming you're talking about me, who's listening to your music. Yeah, real classy, dude. And this is just a little thing, but why on earth do you shout out your name so often on your album, like you're Jason Derulo or Falling in Reverse? Are you so concerned that we're going to forget your material that you have this constant need to identify yourself, even though we already bought your album? Ugh. But despite all this, I would be very wrong not to mention that the final track on the standard edition of this album, a song called Outroduction, is actually pretty damn good. Yeah, it's one of those more money, more problem songs that rappers put out, and it's not as good as Large Amounts by Ludacris, but I actually thought that 2 Chainz did a surprisingly good job balancing his bragging with the real consequences of his new lifestyle, how it separates him from his family and his friends. If only the rest of the album had anywhere close to that level of insight or effort, or justified the subtitle of Me Time. The thing is, the entire album is Me Time for 2 Chainz, where he talks primarily about himself, and outside of a few punchlines that aren't bad, he just starts running out of material and repeating himself or just getting really, really obnoxious. Outroduction is the best song on the album, but I'm listening to it and I'm thinking, man, it sounds like 2 Chainz is actually really trying on this track. Why on earth am I only hearing this sort of effort now? Look, in the end, I really don't hate 2 Chainz's Based on a True Story Part 2 Me Time, because that would imply that there's enough substance on this album to truly hate. I understand why he's popular now, pretty much the same reason that Soulja Boy was popular, and really, as a pop music fan, the fact that I can't find enough, even amongst shallow material, to really get enthused about is really quite saying something. What's most disappointing is that there are flashes of 2 Chainz's potential, and while he is improving since his last album, and while this album isn't anywhere close to good, I get the frustrating feeling that it could have at least been passable. If you're looking for rap music in this vein, though, I recommend you check out somebody else. Hell, give A$AP Ferg a chance. His album was considerably better than this. As it is, I'd skip over this album. I get why 2 Chainz is popular now, believe me, but I don't think he'll be popular for that much longer. So yeah, I know it's kind of a negative review, but if you'd like to like and subscribe, just go ahead. Thanks a lot for watching. If you've got any additional comments on what I might do better or what you want me to review next, let me know. And otherwise, I'll see you next time.